Hey everybody, I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Vic and I'm an art ambassador for Royal Talens. And we're going to be talking about some of my favorite art supplies, so I'm just really jazzed about it. We're going to start out with a PowerPoint, lots of pictures, so no worries. And it's going to be really informative. I just like everybody to understand basically the properties and the features of the products that we're using so that you can better understand how to actually play around with them and make some awesome art. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll just go ahead and jump right into the PowerPoint so we have tons of time to paint. Okay, so let me just share my screen. Here we go. All right, how does that look, everybody? Can we all see it? Looks good? Okay, awesome. I don't hear any complaints, so I'm going to go ahead and start. So basically, here's the agenda for the PowerPoint. I'm going to go over an introduction of Royal Talens and also myself. Going to do a quick overview of both the Rembrandt Watercolor and Pastels. I'm going to also go over the different types of specialty paints that there are and their properties. We're going to also go over the other supplies that we'll be using today. And then we're going to jump right into the techniques. All right. So Royal Talens was established in 1899 in Apeldoorn, Holland. So all the way over there in Europe, but they established a new branch in 2015. So I've been with them pretty much since the start. I started with them in 2016 here in the US. So Royal Talens is mostly known for, we make a whole bunch of different products, but some of our more popular lines are the Van Gogh, Rembrandt, Eco line. We also make Amsterdam and also art creations, but we make everything, truly, from watercolor to pastels to acrylic to oil. We do a ton of different stuff. And also Royal Talens has a wonderful art ambassador program, which brings me to the next page. So just a little intro on me. So again, I've been an art ambassador for about 6 years with Royal Talens, and I teach workshops for them. I demo art at trade shows, art stores, conventions, basically just have the dream job of playing around with art supplies and talking to people. So wonderful that it's allowed me to be a full-time artist. And in my free time, I have a major love for comic books. So I have my own self-published comic book series and card game. So I manage an Etsy shop where I sell that stuff. And, I actually used to work at an art store for about 5 years, and it really gave me a large understanding of all the different types of art supplies. So being an art ambassador allows me to use a ton of different ones, and yeah, and I get to share that with you guys. So I'm very excited. I also just wanted to show you a little bit of my art. I like things to be super rainbow and colorful, but I'm really into mixed media art, mainly watercolor and pastel, which is what we're going to be doing today. So let's go on and start talking about the products. Okay, so again, Royal Talens is based in the Netherlands, but the Rembrandt paints are also made there under strict quality standards. So these paints are very special because of the very high quality pigments that they use. All different types, but mica formulations are the main thing. Because they are very highly pigmented, it means that they're very high quality. So they're both light, fast, and archival. They have a gum Arabic binder, and they're sold in tubes or also pans. And pictured there, we have a little set of them in the pan form. And then to the right is a painting that I did at NAMTA on the black Van Gogh watercolor paper, using these paints. And as you can see, the colors really kind of just jump off the black page. So they're very interesting, and I'm really excited to just get into them. So there's 4 different types of these specialty colors: metallic, chameleon, interference, and spark. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go over those because they all kind of interact differently. Okay, so the for the metallic colors, the color that you guys received is light gold. So the metallic colors look like a layer of precious metal in which the light reflects, and they're kind of coin colors, you know, they have silver, gold, copper, bronze, kind of all those really beautiful metallic colors. And as you can see on the picture on the left, that gold metallic background really makes a nice juxtaposition to the matte watercolors that I used to paint the dog in the center. So you can have a lot of fun with making these actually look like a gold leaf. They're very rich. And also you can blend them with a lot of different colors, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So we'll go ahead and play around with those. Today, we're also going to be using a chameleon color. So the chameleon colors, they're really interesting. They kind of change color as soon as you move the paper or your viewing position. They can kind of change from a yellow to a blue. And people also like to call them flip-flop colors. So I took a little kind of color swatch sample sheet from our European website, so it's not quite in English, but you can see down there the 4 different colors that we have to offer, and they just kind of range from, you know, 1 to 3 colors, and then they flip-flop depending on what light you view them in. So these ones you can do some really cool effects with. Okay, so the next color is the interference violet. So the interference colors are a little bit different than the other ones in terms of they mostly show up on a dark background. So these are perfect for painting on black paper or on top of a darker color. However, as soon as you paint the interference colors on top of a white paper, they have a much more subtle effect. It's almost like a fairy dust. It's very subtle, just has a little bit of sheen on it. As you can see, I included on the bottom right-hand corner, kind of a swatch of how the same color, the interference violet, looks on the white paper and the black paper. So I also included this painting of the koala that I did. The background is that interference violet on the black paper. So you can see how really shiny and strong that is. Okay, last but not least is the spark colors. And included in your demo kit, you guys should have received the spark blue. So the spark colors shine like a night sky with an irregular shine that results from the subtle differences in the size of the reflective pigment particles. So basically what that means is they have a bunch of different pigment sizes that refract light differently, and they really do look like a glitter. The first swatch that I included for you guys, I feel like it didn't do it justice. So I included another swatch that showed some of our other spark colors that we have. And you can see that they almost have like a glitter appearance to them. Okay, so just really quickly, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with how to use a watercolor. And this has the exact same properties as your standard watercolor, where it can be diluted with water, or you can use it straight out of the tube or pan in its kind of full strength. And of course, it's water soluble. So after you lay your watercolor down, you can always take a brush and work back into it. You can either pick it up or re-wet it and blend other colors into it. And of course, this can be used in conjunction with other wet mediums. So this can actually work with a whole bunch of different things, anything that's going to be wet and also dry. We're going to be using pastels with it, but you can actually mix these metallic and specialty watercolors in with acrylic paint. You can mix them with ink. You can mix them with watercolor pencils. And that's because they have that gum arabic binder. So if we have time after we work on our hummingbird, then I'm definitely going to show you guys a couple different things with that as well.
Right. I'm sorry. I just wanted to interject for a second because there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat.
Oh.
Everybody received should have received 2 half pan samples in their sample kit, but they were assorted. So not everybody received the spark blue. It was, yeah.
Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause a mass confusion.
No, it's okay.
My bad. Okay, great.
Also, excuse me, I'm sorry, Tara, but a couple of us received something called graphite, which was not anything you mentioned.
Oh, okay. So the graphite is a metallic color.
Okay, so that's a metallic. Okay.
That's a metallic, yeah, yeah. Okay, great. Well, I'm sorry about that, guys. I thought that we were all painting with the same 4 colors, so that must be my mistake. But that's okay. We're going to be able to do everything that we need to do with any colors that we're going to be using today, so no worries. Okay. Any other questions, Tara? Or do you want me just to keep going?
Oh, you're good, Vic. Sorry, I just wanted to
yeah.
to just
No,
put
thank
that
you.
out there. Okay, sure thing.
Okay, awesome. So that brings me to the Rembrandt Pastels. So these are some of the most popular pastels on the market. People like to call them the workhorse of the pastels because so many people can complete an entire painting with these. They're kind of a medium density pastel. So you're able to really lay down a foundation. Some pastel artists like to use softer pastels on top, but you can complete an entire painting with these. So the Rembrandt pastels are very high quality. They're made from the purest pigment and mixed with the finest quality kaolin clay binder. So what that means is that they have very high quality pure pigments mixed with a clay binder, which makes them very compatible with water. So they are water soluble, which is going to be great because I'm going to show you guys some techniques on how we can use them with watercolors today. Because they are professional grade, very high quality, they are also archival, they're light fast, they're not going to fade with time, and of course, they pair great with watercolor. So I'm going to be displaying the muted color set, the half stick set, and that's down in the bottom right-hand corner for you guys to see. Okay. I also wanted to go over jelly rolls. So these are made by Sakura. They are a gel-based ink, and it started in the 1980s. I believe that they were one of the first ones on the market. Now, these jelly rolls are really great because they are so opaque. They work wonderfully on the black paper. With that being said, they're fade resistant, so probably not quite archival, but perfect for sketchbooks or anything you may scan. The jelly rolls are also water soluble, so we're going to be able to go ahead and work some water into these and get some really cool different effects as well. And again, they're perfect for highlights on that black paper. Okay, so next we will talk about the paper. So we're going to be using Van Gogh black watercolor paper today. It's an acid-free paper. It's 100% cellulose, 140 pounds, and has a fine grain structure with a matte finish. So this black paper does not have your standard kind of cold press appearance and feel to it. Instead of having like a lot of little bumps, it kind of has a more linear structure. It's a little bit different than what you're probably going to be used to. However, it's really quite perfect for using with pastels. It really kind of grips the pigment, and also it works perfect with the metallic watercolors that we're going to be using today. So with that being said, you guys are probably like, let's go ahead and paint, so let's do it. So just go ahead and give me a moment to switch my cameras. Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to go ahead and jump off of this camera and move on over to my demo desk. So just one moment, guys. All right, can everybody see this okay? Does this look good? Just want to make sure before I start.
Looks good to me.
So this is going to be the Hummingbird that I'm going to be demoing for you. But first, I wanted to kind of jump into the supplies and show you a couple different techniques on how to use these specialty colors. So it seems like everybody has received, different pans, but I'm going to be showing one of each different types today. The spark blue, the chameleon color, the interference violet, and then that light gold. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a sheet of our black Van Gogh watercolor paper. And if you guys have, just like a regular graphite pencil, that will work fine for this. I'm going to use a white colored pencil just so that you can see what I'm doing on the camera. But if you have a white watercolor pencil or colored pencil or even a charcoal pencil, and you want to use white, you absolutely can do that too. So we're going to go ahead drawing some. I will let Tara put that into the chat to see ahead of time. But if you haven't drawn them, we're going to go ahead and draw them together. So just take your time to kind of sketch out these shapes. They don't have to be perfect at all. We're basically just trying to have something to paint these basic techniques in. And all seashells are made differently, so they look a little bit different than the example. But just go ahead and draw those onto the page. Okay. So if you're having issues with the link, or maybe just to keep it easier, I'm just going to kind of draw them one at a time and hold it up so that you can see.
When did you make the purchase? And so I searched it. And there was a second thing I tried was it took me like 5 minutes to fix it. Okay, well, if it's over the 30 days, then yeah, that's still policy. Like I said, I can hold on for a second, please. Like I said, I'm gonna take your information and I'll find out who it needs to go to, and someone will give you a call back to see what they can do for you. Okay?
We lost your camera, Tara. I'm not Tara. Vic?
Oh, did you lose my camera?
It's still there. You can pin it, and that will keep it as the main picture. I found that worked.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think if you click in the upper right-hand corner, there should be 3 dots, and you can pin it. And then you'll be able to see it all the time.
Okay, I just pinned Vic, so that should be better. Let me know if it's not.
Vic, I'm sorry, Vic, because Tara spoke and we lost you because I hadn't had a chance to pin you yet. Can you say something so we get you back?
Hello, testing.
Thank you.
No problem. And again, don't worry about making these shapes exact. It's okay if they're not totally, especially this next one is a little tricky, so.
I lost it.
Can you see me? Okay.
Hey Vic, someone's asking what pencil you're using. Is that a white? I can't tell.
Yeah, this is a white Albrechter watercolor pencil, but you know, a regular pencil will work just fine if you have that lying around. Alternatively, you know, any kind of white colored pencil will work just fine. I just want to make sure that everybody can see what I'm working on from the camera. So. All right, and Tara, just to confirm, does everyone have pastels and a jelly roll as well? Or are we just working with the two different colors?
The pastels and the jelly roll were optional. They were not in the supply they were on the supply list, but not in the sample kit. So the sample kit was the two pan colors, half pan colors, 10 black postcards, the brush.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, while everybody is finishing up drawing their lines, I will go ahead and talk about the brushes really quick. These are the Aqua Elite brushes by Princeton, and they are a synthetic Kolinsky brush. So they act just like a Kolinsky, except for they're totally synthetic. So they're animal friendly. And also these rounds come to a beautiful point. So I believe there was the 8 and the 12 in the set. So I'll be demoing those today, and that's called the Princeton Aqua Elite. All right, so what do you guys think? Are you ready to jump in? Does everybody pretty much have their shells done, or do we need another minute or two?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So now, of course, everyone will have a little bit different colors. Some people have picked up the pastels and the pens already. So if I'm using a different color than you, then, you know, just use your best judgment of which one you want to use. And of course, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I love questions and I want to answer as many as possible. So as far as pans go, I always like to wet them before I begin. If you have a little spray bottle, these work perfectly. This one's made by Holbein, but you can just take a wet brush and really just kind of lay some water on top of the actual pan. The more wet the pan is, the more pigment will come up with your brush. So I really like to spray that before I begin working on it. And you can kind of like spray it a couple minutes beforehand too, and just let it soak in. But you can just take either one of your brushes, any kind of watercolor brush you have will work just fine for this. I'm going to go ahead and dip mine into the water. And I'm going to be using the Spark Blue, just so that you guys know. And you can kind of
quick. Somebody's asking if they don't have pastels, what would be a good alternative? Is there anything else that they could use?
Absolutely. So, I mean, if you have watercolor pencils, that will work good. I'm going to be demoing, techniques with the pastels and the watercolors together. I'll go ahead and kind of show you what I'm aiming for. I did this one yesterday just to double check everything. So if you have anything that's kind of like a watercolor pencil or a dry pastel, something clay-based, those would work perfectly. But if not, if you can follow along, and I will suggest different art supplies that you can use as we go through. But some of them will just be kind of playing around with the actual technique of the paint. So if you're just following along with the paint today, then that's okay too. Okay, awesome. So for the first one, I'm just going to go ahead and dip into that spark blue with my wet brush and just kind of like working around the actual pigment. Just want to make sure that my brush is kind of loaded full. And basically for the first shell, what we're going to do is we're going to plug the color into the very middle of the shell, like this, just kind of leaving it away from the edges. And as you apply that paint onto the paper, you'll see those pigments kind of like dance around. It's really pretty. The camera does not capture the magic of these paints at all. But once you have those, and once you have that in place, you can go ahead, clean up.
Vic, Jill asked, did you wet the brush too, or just the paint?
So yeah, every time before I dip into the paint, I wet my brush. These pigments are so powerful that I want to make sure that I get a whole bunch of them on my brush, but I need enough water to move them around also. So I always dip my brush into water before I dip it into the metallic paint. Okay. So once you have your pigment kind of put in the center of your shell, I'm just going to take a completely clean brush, just water, no paint, and I'm going to focus on moving that paint around the very edges of the shell. And as you see, the water makes that black paper really, really dark. It really kind of saturates it. So the color will change once it's dry, of course, but you can kind of move that pigment around to fill in that open space on your paper. You can just kind of watch it move around. It's really gorgeous. But as this,
everybody's commenting in the comments how beautiful it is. So if you guys want to make a comment, a comment, it's fine. You can unmute yourselves, but yeah, it's really beautiful.
This paint, like nothing comes close to how stunning this paint is.
I live in a city and I feel like I'm looking at stars and stuff. It's awesome. I don't get to see the stars very often.
I know, right? It's like you could definitely easily paint a galaxy with this paint. It would just paint itself, to be honest. That's awesome.
My paint doesn't look as bright as yours does. I'm not sure why.
Well, because some colors are a little bit more subtle and some are a little bit more vibrant.
I'm using Spark Blue, the one that I got in my in the kit.
Okay, then probably is there isn't enough water kind of being soaked into your paint.
Okay.
Almost like a little puddle of water on top of mine. It kind of just penetrates the top part of it because it's so dry in the pan. You want to make sure that it's nice and wet before you.
Okay, thanks.
Of course. So yeah, if yours is not as kind of intense as this, definitely just make sure to use a little bit extra water. So I'm just going to focus on doing that all over my whole shell, kind of pulling of that pigment away to the lines. And then again, as it dries, it's going to be kind of like a gradient of metallic. It'll be the strongest in the center and kind of more settled around the edges. So it'll make a really pretty effect. All right. And I'm just going to kind of lay these as we go, just to kind of remind everybody what we're doing. All right. So we're going to come back to this shell. That was just kind of the first step, but we're going to wait for it to dry up and we're going to move on to our next one. Everybody should be able to do this one with the 2 colors that they have. Everybody's is going to turn out a little bit different, but this is a really simple technique that works really wonderfully with the different specialty colors. So all we're going to do is just really clean out our brush, make sure that there's just water on it. And I'm sure you guys have noticed, but as soon as you dump your, specialty brush into water, you get some kind of pigment that lowers down to the bottom. So I like to have, a couple different compartments for different colors, just so that mine doesn't get so contaminated. But that's just if you're being picky. For what we're doing today, 1 pot of water each is fine.
Vic, Jill asked what color is the outer color. You only use blue on there, right? The outer color is just the water?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Plugged dark blue into the very center, kind of keeping it away from the edges. And then just use water to kind of feather it out to the edge. So it's just the gradation, in the paper, kind of making it look like it's 2 different colors.
Really cool. And Melissa's asking, do you recommend keeping 1 brush for each type? Does the glitter, sparkle, etc. stay on the brushes?
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. Whatever works for you. I think if you really like 1 brush and you have 1 brush that's your favorite, just have different compartments for water. And I'm sure you guys can see, especially if you're wiping your brush on like a white rag, that a lot of pigment comes off on it. So it just really easily kind of contaminates. So if you wanted to use separate brushes, then that's an awesome idea. You can absolutely do that. All right, guys. So this next shell is going to be a really simple technique that I'm sure you all have done. It is the wet on wet technique. And for this technique, you can just go ahead and use your brush and paint water over the entire inside of the shell. Now, you don't want it to be like a puddle of water, but you want it to have a really nice sheen on it when you're done, and just kind of fill in completely inside the lines of this shell. All right. So you can see that there's a little bit of blue glitter dancing around in mine. I wasn't careful enough, but that's okay. It's just kind of a heads up for you guys' paintings when you actually apply this paint inside your finished work. Okay. So after you have your water in place and you have a nice kind of sheen on it, what you're going to do is take your brush and, whatever 2 colors you have is what we're going to use for this. I'm going to be showcasing the interference violet and the light gold. But basically, I'm just going to go ahead and dip my brush in water and kind of work it into that interference violet, like so. And the wet on wet technique is basically just using a wet brush with wet paint on wet paper. And what it does is it kind of spiders out the paint a little bit. So the more pigment that you use, the smaller and less water, the smaller the dot will be. But the more pigment and more water you use, the larger the dots will be. So it just kind of depends how, large and loose or how precise you want it to be. So less water, more precise, more water, less. But basically what we do is we're just going to go ahead and drop a whole bunch of dots on our shell. You don't want to cover up the whole thing because we're going to go back in with another color and do the same thing. But this interference violet, I just want to quickly note how some of the dots look a little bit white. That's because there's a whole bunch of pigment in the white dots. That's the mother of pearl effect that I was talking about earlier, how when that pigment is really kind of close together, it looks almost like a fairy kind of color. But as you see, it looks violet when it's a little bit thinned out. And if you use a little bit extra water, you'll see that your dots are kind of moving around a little bit, probably around the edges of your shell. That's okay. I think that's kind of a cool look. So you can play around with that. But just go ahead and drop a bunch of dots in your shell, and then you can go ahead and clean out your brush for the next color. So that next color that I'm going to use is going to be the light gold. So this one is the metallic color. And I'm just going to go ahead and place my gold dots on any open black areas that there are, but you can place it on top of the purple ones too. There's so many different techniques that you can play around with, but the wet on wet one is really fun. And I think it actually looks like some of the seashells that are out there. I don't know their exact names, but if you guys do, let me know. I want to say conch shell, but I could be totally wrong. So you'll be able to see firsthand the difference between that kind of metallic color versus the interference color. That interference color has a lot more white in it, and then that metallic has kind of that coin look almost. It's more of like a satin shade, like a satin finish, I should say. All right. So for the next shell, we are going to be using pastels. So we are going to add some accents with the metallic watercolors. So if you have pastels at home, or if you have colored pencils, you can also use ink. If you have acrylic ink or even acrylic paint, you could do that for this next one. And if you don't, you can just go ahead and watch, or you can also kind of do whatever you would like to in the shell. You can just use it as kind of like a freestyle one. So for this next one, I'm just going to show you guys kind of like a basic kind of pastel technique. I'm going to be using the darker kind of red brown, the medium shade. It's almost like an ochre. And then this Naples yellow light, it's almost like a really creamy kind of color. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go ahead and take this half stick, and I'm gonna focus my darker warm color around the edges of my shell. Now, when you're applying this pastel, you can kind of press into the paper, and you'll see that it's picking up that linear texture of the paper there, and that's okay. The harder you press down, the more it will flatten out that texture. But what it's really doing is it's helping us grip the pigments from the pastel. So anyway, I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of like loosely block in around the edges where I want this darker color to go. And if you guys have standard watercolors at home too, this is a really cool thing to kind of paint with a watercolor instead of just a water to blend out the pastels. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So once you have your dark colors in place, you can go in with your mid-tone, and basically what you're going to do is you're just going to kind of fill in around the edges of your darker color. It's okay if you overlap a little bit. you can actually overlap as much as you would like to, just kind of also blend them together manually. But I like to leave a little bit of open space for my lighter color. And this is going to act as our highlight. So if you guys are interested in this technique, I highly suggest trying it on white paper. The white paper is actually going to be a little bit easier because when you use a wet brush to blend these colors out, it's going to pick up the white paper underneath instead of the black. So it's going to act a little bit differently, but it's a really fun technique to use. So if you're coloring your shell in with colored pencils, just go ahead and shade it how you would like to. If you're using watercolor pencils, you can follow the same format. Acrylic paint, you know what to do. You're basically just going to paint that shell. But I'm basically going to just take my size 12 round and I'm just going to go ahead and get it wet. And I'm going to go ahead and start blending these pastels together. Now, I like to start at the edge and kind of work my way in. And sometimes after I've made a couple strokes, I'll have too much pastel on my brush. I'll hold it up for you guys to see. It picked up all of that pigment that was on the shell. So sometimes you'll have to wipe your brush off on the side. But basically what we're doing is we're just getting those pigments wet so that they kind of, they lose that window to the paper beneath, kind of covers it up. So the cool thing about using the pastels with water is that it's a very buildable technique. So after you've kind of finished using water to blend out your whole shape, you can actually go back in with any pastel color when it's wet, or you can wait for it to dry, and you can continue to build up your colors. So let's say you feel like you lost too much of your shadows, you can go back in with that dark color and plug them right back in. Now, when your paper and the pastels are wet underneath, you'll see that there's a lot greater output of the pastel onto the paper. It almost looks like it's wet, and that's pretty much because it is. So you can just kind of continue to build up that shell until you're happy with it. But I'm just going to reestablish all of my shadows and also my highlights. So my lightest color in the very center. And you can use water to blend it out again if you would like to, or if you're happy with how it looks, then you can leave it as is. So it's totally a preference thing, but I'll go ahead and blend out with water again so you guys can see how that looks. And it's kind of cool. I feel like you get a lot of happy accidents when you work with the pastel and water at the same time. So gotta love happy accidents. Okay. All right. So here's that finished pastel shell. So we're gonna go ahead and do the second half to that later. So I'll go ahead and label it, give you guys another minute or so to finish that up. And if you have any questions, definitely let me know.
Someone commented that it appears that the brush is picking up all of the color. Is that just the nature of using this technique with pastels?
Yeah, but also if it is like wiping all of the pigments away and just your paper is showing underneath, then you may be using just a little bit too much water. And that's totally understandable, especially if you're used to using just watercolor. Basically what you're gonna wanna do is dip your brush into the water and then wipe it off onto a rag off to the side. You want it to be damp, but you don't want it to have you don't want it to be full of water. So that was a great question. Thank you. right. So the next one is also going to be a pastel, but we're going to use the pastels with the watercolor this time. So if you guys don't have a pastel, you can follow this first step with one of your two colors because it will work just fine with watercolor as well. So I'm basically just going to choose one of my pastel colors, and we're going to be drawing the contour lines for this scalloped shell over here. So don't worry about making it perfect or anything. We're basically just going to be drawing these curved lines all the way across our pastel, or all the way across our shell. And as you're holding the pastel and using it, if you are following along with one, I like to use the hard edges of the pastel to kind of get that really detailed line. This also works great with watercolor pencils as well, if you have any of those. So if you're following along with watercolor, basically just go ahead and try to paint these lines in there. The best way to get a really thin line with a pointed brush like this is to make sure that there is enough water on the brush to really fluidly pull those lines, but be sure to not have too much that it's coming off thick. So go ahead and follow this pattern here. All right. And once you have your lines in place, we're going to go ahead and dip into one of the colors that we have left. So I'm going to go ahead and show off the chameleon color because we haven't gotten into that one yet. This one is one of my favorite colors. It is the chameleon violet blue gold. And it has a whole bunch of kind of sparkle glitter look effect to it. So the best way to make this effective is when you are applying the chameleon color, try to do it in between the lines. So your brush will probably brush up against some of the pastel lines that are already in place. And that's okay. We kind of want that to happen. It's all right if a little bit of overlap happens. But with this chameleon color, if you guys have this one at home, you will be able to see the color shift. And again, this one is violet, blue, and gold. So hopefully you will be able to see that. But you can just go through your whole shell and you're going to fill in any any black space in between the pastel with that chameleon color. And I'm trying to like bring it all the way down to the other edge of the shell. And if you want to, if some of that chameleon color is looking a little bit cloudy because maybe it picked up some of that extra pastel, you can clean out your brush and dip back into the paint and really layer it up. That's what's so awesome about this paint is you can make it as gaudy as you want to or as subtle as you want to. So I'm going to just go back in there and plug in some more of this chameleon on top of the darker areas. All right. Do we have any questions before we move on to the next one? Are you guys hanging in there okay? Am I going too fast?
So you suggested layering it to make it brighter. Would it be more effective if you layer it after each layer is dry, or can you just layer it like wet on wet?
That is a great question. That is totally up to you. That's a preference. Either way will be effective. Either way will work just fine. Normally, if you're a little bit more of a controlling painter, if you want full control over how it looks and you want that area to be super perfect and clean, then I would recommend waiting for it to dry, because it does look a little bit different when it's dry, and then you can decide if you wanted to add another. But for me, I'm kind of a looser, kind of sloppy painter. I like to really layer it up when it's wet and then see how it dries. And if it needs more, I add it then. But that's a great question.
Thanks. It really looks beautiful. I love this.
I know, isn't that gorgeous? When I first used these paints, I was like, oh my gosh, they look like magical seashells. And here we are today painting them. So yeah, the chameleon color is one of my favorites. So all right, guys. So for this next shell, we're going to do something that's a little unique. We're going to use our jelly roll as a partial base for this shell. Basically, I want to show off how that interference color looks different on a white background than on a black background. So if you do not have a jelly roll at home, you may have another white pen that is water soluble. Now would be a great time to grab it. If you have like a Posca, something that is acrylic, that's an acrylic white marker, that would work as well. But if you don't have one, that's okay. If you have any white watercolor paper, definitely grab it just so that you can see how this paint reacts on the white paper versus the black. It's super important because they look totally different. And that's for the interference color, okay? So if you have the jelly roll and you're following along with me, or if you have another pen, basically what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start scribbling. We are laying down some white pigment so that we can go back in with water and kind of blend it out. And this will provide that white base for our interference colors. So as you scribble, just try your best to make kind of like close circles together. We want the white to be really concentrated. And I'm just kind of doing it around the upper edges of the white lines. But, you know, again, if you just have the white watercolor paper, then this will show you how it works too. So as far as the jelly roll goes, you can really go to town with making it a solid white. But for now, this is going to be just fine to show you guys how this interference violet will work. So after you have all of your scribbles in place, you're going to go ahead and clean off your brush. And we're just going to take the wet brush and kind of brush over top of the jelly roll. You may need to kind of feather over top of it and almost like agitate it a little bit. But what we want is a lot of different white values in our shell. So as you move that white around with your brush, if you accidentally pick up too much of it, that's okay, because we can always apply more white on top. So it's going to be water soluble, and we can always work back into it. And we can always pick it up. And as you can see, this white jelly roll really actually stands out really nicely on the paper, especially for the text. A lot of people use it for journaling and that kind of stuff, but you can actually use it for illustration as well. So, all right. So this is going to be kind of, so we're going to go for something like this. It's still wet, so it's going to look a little bit different when it's dried up. but we want all the different values of white and gray and that kind of black paper showing through as well. So we want a whole bunch of different values. And while we wait for this shell to dry, we're going to go back up to our spark blue shell, our first one, and we're going to start adding a couple details on there too. So we'll wait for this one to dry. So if you're still working on that, no worries, take your time.
Vic, Trisha asked, what is the largest size art piece you have completed using the metallic watercolors?
Oh, that is a great question. I think the biggest one is probably a 12 by 16. I pulled aside my jellyfish one just to show you guys kind of like how big it can be, and also just like a couple details on it as well. But you can do, a full piece with these. This is the largest size black Van Gogh paper that there is. But yeah, you can definitely go large. You just gotta be able to either use, a black watercolor ground or find a larger piece of black paper. But that would be awesome to do something that's really, really big. That would be so cool. Okay, awesome. So we're gonna jump back up to our first shell, which is the spark blue. And that one should be pretty dry by now. So this one's gonna be super simple. And if you don't have the jelly roll, that's okay. Basically what we're gonna do is we're just gonna add some details right on top. I'm just gonna do almost like Charlie Brown kind of lines on here, just to add a little bit of a pattern on there. Some of my favorite things to do when I'm doing mixed media is really play around with the layers. If you wanted to, you could layer this jelly roll on top of any pre-painted dry surface and then take a wet brush and wet the whole thing and see what happens, and just playing around and having fun with it. So if you like how your design came out when it's dry, you don't have to use the water. But if you want to, you can. The world is your oyster, right?
Vicky is asking, is Van Gogh considered a cotton black paper?
So it's actually 100% cellulose. And Steve, would you be able to elaborate on that? Steve still with us?
Scott, are you here?
Oh my God, Scott.
There we
I'm
are.
so
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
Yes, so the paper, the Van Gogh postcards that you all are working with, that is a 100% cellulose paper. It doesn't contain any cotton in it. To my knowledge, I don't believe that there's 100% cotton black paper out there, but I really love this paper because it really has a lot of nice texture. It's not overbearing in nature at all. I think it's just kind of a medium grain, which allows you to do a lot of different things, especially if you're using pens and other media like that.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Oh, all right. So great questions, guys. Keep them coming. All right. So next we're going to go ahead and jump over to the one that we did earlier with pastel. I'm going to use the smaller of the two brushes, and I'm just going to put some of the metallic light gold as kind of highlights, little accents on here. And one of my favorite things to do is use a medium like pastels, something that has that matte kind of quality, and then adding the accents on top of it. You can see that they really just kind of pop right off the page, especially with that black paper contrast against it. So you can add whatever kind of design you want onto your shells. Just going to do a quick one. And this is a really cool technique just to add a little bit of detail, maybe even to like a finished watercolor painting. You could add some of this gold into like some of the stars in the sky. Lots of different options for how you could put this into your own art. All right, so our jelly roll base shell should be dry. And for this one, we're going to dip into our interference. It's really simple. We're basically just going to do a wash across the entire shell. And you guys will see that the interference color looks totally different on top of the white as opposed to on top of the black. And I always like to talk about like even the scales of a fish. If you're painting a fish and you wanted to get a lot of dimension in there really easily, you could just use the interference color on top of everything. And the purple or whatever color for interference you're using will show up darker on the dark spots and more vivid, and it will show up lighter on top of the white spots. So you end up with something pretty magical. Right, and then I always like to reserve one shell as kind of like a freestyle shell. I like you guys to play around with maybe two techniques combined, or maybe you really want to try something out. Now is the perfect time to try it out and see how it comes out. Just kind of have fun with it. And while you do that, I'm going to go ahead and set up for the hummingbird. So play around on that freestyle shell and definitely let Tara and me know what you guys came up with.
Yeah, I've got the gallery view up so everybody can pop their shells up in the camera and we can see all this great work that was created. I'm excited.
Oh, awesome. I don't know if you guys can hear my cat meowing, but she has been fed. She's okay, in case anyone's wondering.
I was just about to say somebody needs to show the pay the tax and show the cat. That's good.
She just turned 21, so she is allowed to be as bitter as she wants to be, I guess.
Congratulations to Kitty. That's amazing.
I was almost like, here's your first drink of alcohol, but wasn't gonna let it happen. Right. She got fish instead. So.
Oh, good girl. They do get extra talky as they get older.
Oh yeah, they do. All right. Well, how's everybody's shells going? Are you guys ready to move on to the hummingbird? And I'm wondering how many people are going to follow along with me, or if I should just demo it. What do you think, Tara?
unmute. Well, we can ask. Did everybody get the line art ahead of time and have time to sketch out the hummingbird, or should we give you time to do that?
Follow along, please.
Yeah. Well,
Okay. Okay, awesome. Well, let's go ahead and give everybody else a chance to go ahead and sketch out that line art of the hummingbird. It's totally optional, you know, if you want to follow along or just watch, but we'll give everybody a couple more minutes to sketch out the hummingbird and get everything set up, and then we'll go ahead and jump into it. All right, so just another minute or two on sketching out that hummingbird. And while we're waiting for everybody to be on the same page, if anybody wants to talk about which, you know, color they used, that was their favorite, or if anybody likes any techniques, or, you know, just let us know.
or if anybody wants to hold up their shells so we can see them, that would be awesome. Oh, beautiful.
Oh,
Nice
I'm on my
job. Very
phone.
cool.
I wish I could see them. I'm sure they're gorgeous, guys.
Some really nice ones.
That's awesome.
Can you get similar effects if you don't have, if you have graphite and just one of the colors, the chameleon, one of the chameleons, the one that you spoke about, can you get similar effects if you just add one of your regular color watercolors to, you know, just mix them? Do you get just very similar?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So with graphite, it might be a little hard, but they do make a pearl white color in the metallic little specialty kind of collection. And if you have a pearl, like a color that's pearl, like a white, you can tint that with any standard watercolor to be any color. So that's a great question. As far as the graphite goes, You will absolutely be able to tint it. It's just going to be kind of in that darker, more toned down kind of color range.
Thank you.
Of course.
Does Plaza carry these like half pans individually? Where can we go in and buy a couple of different colors, or is everything in a set or a tube?
We have individual tubes right now, the specialty colors. They're in Nashville, Rockville, Bethesda, Fairfax, and in Kenwood in Cincinnati.
And
on plazaart.com.
And how big are the tubes?
They're 15 mil tubes, I believe.
Nope, 10 mil.
10
10 mil tubes.
So pretty pricey.
Yeah. I bought it a couple of days ago from the Art Plaza store in Rockville. So do you prefer
I'll get you a link
the
for
tube?
them.
Do you prefer the tube to the pan? I seem to prefer the tube. The colors are brighter. It comes out brighter for me.
You know, I do prefer the tube just off the top of my head. Like I like to have my own palettes and make my own palettes with collections of colors. With that being said, I do think that the pans are just as bright, but you really have to work the water into them. Like I have this little spray bottle, and whenever I'm working with pans, I just always keep them really wet, because when you're using them straight out of the tube, you get them in their most wet form. You have all that pigment, but when they're in the dry pan form, you really have to like keep making them wet to work as effectively. But it's kind of nice to have them in this little set. I of course took the other colors out, but it comes in this little aluminum set. It folds up really small, and it comes with a travel brush as well. So and the Rembrandt travel brushes are pure red sable too. So it's kind of a nice little set, especially if you are interested in trying a variety of the colors out. But if you're interested in just trying out one or two colors, then the tubes or the pans, sold separately will work for you too.
Are all the colors in that little set, or is it just a select?
I don't think all the colors are in there. I think it's missing some of them because there's quite a few. Scott, can you help us out with that?
Sure. Yeah, most of these sets, the ones that Vic has, they include, it's actually 12 colors. So, and basically I think the set that Vic is referring to is what we would consider to be some of our specialty color sets. I can go ahead and put that in the chat if you're interested.
There was also a book that came, at least in the box that I received in Washington, D.C. There was a whole book that tells you all about the pigments and the different colors that are available. It didn't have pricing, but it had the whole list of colors and everything.
Yeah, was there a color chart? I just put a link in the chat for the tubes that we have in this range on plazaart.com. And they're physically in those stores that I mentioned, but not every Plaza stores got these because they're a brand new launch. So it was a limited selection of stores.
All right, guys. Well, what do you think? Is everybody pretty much all ready to start painting the hummingbird?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So, of course, everyone has different supplies. So if you have any questions along the way of what you can substitute for something, in case I forget to mention it, please don't be shy. Go ahead and ask. But basically, as what I want you guys to keep in mind is this is going to be a very mixed media kind of piece. There's going to be a whole bunch of layering that's involved in it. So kind of as we move through it, don't be super hung up on one of your layers not looking exactly how you want to, or maybe it looks a little weird. because we're going to be adding multiple layers on top, and we can always go back in and tweak it.
We have 2 questions, Vic, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, will the specialty colors work with other brands, or are they formulated to only blend well with the Rembrandt watercolors?
They should work seamlessly with any other brand. You know, they have a gum Arabic binder, so they should work just fine with any other watercolors.
Great, awesome, thank you. And then, will any opaque color or semi-opaque work on black paper?
Oh, that's a wonderful question too. Yes. So what I like to do is if you just have standard watercolors and you're interested in painting on black paper, you can pick up a tube of opaque white watercolor or even gouache. I also like to use this Amsterdam acrylic ink. It's really fluid. So you can tint the white with any watercolor you want and get that same kind of effect on top of the black paper. So yeah, semi-opaque and opaque will work perfectly for this. All right, awesome. So for the first step, we're going to go ahead and get our brush nice and wet. I'm going to be using the chameleon color first. The chameleon color that I'll be using is that purple, violet blue gold. And basically where we're going to put this is in any areas that there may be green on our hummingbird. But as I apply it, instead of just filling it in solid, I'm going to kind of do this little dabbing technique, almost like just little dots. And that's because the hummingbird has such small round feathers that after we really kind of build this area up, we're going to see bits of metallic coming out from underneath, and it's going to be a really pretty effect. So don't feel like you have to, you know, cover that whole area solid, but you want to fill it in with a good amount of dots. And I'm just going to go ahead and fill in that area, and then I'll hold it up to the camera for everyone to see. But I like to use the chameleon as the kind of under layer color, because after we layer our pastels and stuff on top, you'll be able to see bits of this metallic kind of showing through, and it's going to be a really cool effect. It's going to really allude to the hummingbird being iridescent, which is just what we want. And then also, as you're applying these little dots around the eyes and the beak on the head, I try to make them even smaller than where they are everywhere else in the body. And the chameleon color is so pretty. It's like, oh, I just want to leave it how it is. So pretty. Hate to layer over it, but we're going to add a little bit more of this chameleon color on top of our pastels once we're done with that too.
Yeah, it's so gorgeous.
All right. So the next step is going to be the same kind of dot technique that we applied on the green areas of the hummingbird. But this time we're going to do it with the interference violet on the throat of the hummingbird. So just going to go ahead and dip my size 8 brush into that interference violet. And again, if you're using those pans, be sure to work that water in there. We want this purple to really be quite vibrant on the throat. So as you apply these dots, I suggest applying them kind of like in a linear kind of fashion. It's going to help make it look like it's super shiny, especially when we plug our pastels in here. And in between lines, I'm kind of dabbing my brush off to the side, and it's giving me different ranges of the violet just from that black paper showing through underneath. I'll hold that up so you guys can see that. But basically we want there to be a bunch of different variety on the throat here, and that purple is going to be perfect. So you can even feel like you can layer over top of the lines, especially if you used a white pencil. If you used a graphite pencil, I wouldn't worry about it too much, but you just want to hide those a little bit more.
Hi.
Oh, interesting.
All right, so now that we have our iridescent kind of base down for the hummingbird's iridescent feathers, we're going to go ahead and start plugging in that white. So if you have the jelly roll, now is the time to grab that. If you don't, if you have a white acrylic or a white pastel, anything, white gouache, anything like that will work just fine for this part. But if you're following along with the jelly roll, we're going to go ahead and focus the scribbles against the right-hand side of the chest. And basically the reason we're doing that is because we really want to build up the most highlights on that right-hand most side. You can kind of scribble outwards a little bit with it too, but we're going to use that water to really help blend these jelly rolls. And if you're not sure if you scribbled enough, you know, just remember that you can always go back in. I would do it after it's dry with a jelly roll, just because it is going to be a little bit easier, but you can always go back in after it's dry and apply more. So I'll go ahead and hold mine up to the camera so you can see what it looks like before I wet it. And in my experience, the sooner that you take water and kind of agitate the jelly roll, the better your blend will be. The longer you let it sit, the more chance there may be that you will see the kind of scribble marks that you put down with the actual pen.
Why would you use a jelly roll? It seems very sort of, it's a lot of work. With gouache, you can just do it in a few strokes, you're done.
Absolutely. And if you have gouache, then that will work just perfectly. Basically, we just wanted to, I'm going to use the jelly rolls a little bit later to add some highlights throughout the hummingbird. So I'm just trying to keep the kit size down if people wanted to, you know, buy the whole kit and do the demo. But basically, if you have gouache or something like that at home, then I definitely recommend using that. That would be awesome. But if you're ever out and about and you forget your gouache at home and you have a jelly roll, then you have a backup. You can always go back in with that jelly roll. And the thing about the white pigment as well is if you feel like you used too much water and it's too dark in some areas, just wait for it to dry. You can use another layer, kind of spread that around. Alternatively, if you're not getting the range of the dark paper showing through to the white, you can just use your brush and kind of scrub in the area that you want to pick up. So a lot of push and pull can happen with that. So I'll probably add a little bit more white onto mine after this dries up. All right, and we're also basically going to use the same techniques for the wings, just a little bit different. So instead of, kind of scribbling, we're basically just going to block in a little bit of color. And I would just do it on the upper part of each of these feathers. So just wherever that top line is for the next feather, just go down and block in our jelly roll. So these are really great for getting in tight areas. You have a lot of control with the pen. And you're just going to block in that wing all the way down. And you're going to do it to the other wing as well. All right. So after you have your jelly roll lines in place, you're going to go ahead and use the smaller of the two brushes. Just go ahead and make sure that it's all nice and cleaned out. Don't really want any kind of metallic or sparkle over here on the wings. So we're just going to use our wet brush and we're just going to kind of agitate that line that we just put down and just do that for each of the lines all the way down. And that will help really kind of soften that up and create a bunch of different value in the wing. All right, and we just have a couple more little tiny feather areas to fill in with our white jelly roll before we switch on to our pastels. So basically, this area right here in between the iridescent upper part of the wing and this area that we just did, we're going to go ahead and just draw a couple little feather shapes in there. I'm just basically doing little U shapes, but we want this area to be full of different white values and shapes. And the same goes for this little area down here below the hummingbird's tail. So I'll hold that up so you guys can see that before I get it wet, but it's just this area right here and this tail area down here as well. All right. So next we're going to move on to the pastels. So if you're following along with colored pencils or brush or acrylic or whatever you may have, we're going to be using these 3 greens. One of them is kind of like a raw umber. We have a lighter green and also almost like a dark viridian. So these are the 3 ones that we're going to use from the set for the greens. We're going to start out with the darker. And basically what I want you guys to do is just focus on the area that we put down that first kind of chameleon or blue color. And you're just going to use the edge of your pastel and do those same little small kind of circular marks. And you'll just kind of focus on putting them throughout. Right on top, doesn't have to be on the black paper. You can kind of overlap the metallic a little bit. Basically what we're doing is we're just kind of adding some green to that area and also hiding some of that metallic color so that when it does peek out, it's even more effective. But don't worry, because if you feel like you took away too much of the metallic, you can always add it back in as the final layer. So I'm just going to kind of plug in this dark green sporadically over top of that metallic just by doing these little dots. All right. And then we're going to go back in with our light green, and we're going to add a lot of this green. This green is really going to help brighten up our hummingbird. And we're going to kind of concentrate it in a couple more areas than doing it sporadically throughout. The area that it's most mainly going to be concentrated is down here, and then also up here on the hummingbird's head. So again, you're just going to do that same kind of dabbing small technique. And as you go, you'll be able to see that that light green really kind of jumps off the page, adds a lot of contrast, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So we're just building up our layers to make that as interesting as possible. And if you like your hummingbird, if you're really happy with it and you want to varnish it when it's done, because we used the pastels, I would recommend spray varnish. Something like a fixative with UVLS would be perfect.
So an archival, you're saying an archival fix, an archival spray fixative?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you work with your pastel, or in general with the dark paper, if you start to notice that it's getting a little bit messy around your work area, if it is a dry medium that's making it this way, especially if you use like a white transfer paper to transfer the image, I highly recommend using a black eraser to clean it up. This one is made by Sakura. It's the Sumo Grip, and it's a black eraser. It just works perfectly for cleaning that area up. Depending on what the pigment is, sometimes you can like rub it with your hand really well and it will clean it up. But if you want to be a little bit more precise, these black Sumo Grip erasers work perfectly for that. All right, so let's plug in a little bit more pastel. We're going to go ahead and do a couple sporadic kind of feathers with our last green. And then we're going to move on to the throat. The throat, we're going to be using the 2 pinks. So this third green is like really a kind of like a greenish raw umber. And it's going to help us add some earth tones into these feathers, which will play really nicely off of the metallics. Okay. So for the throat, we'll be using those 2 pinks. And as I said earlier, try your best to make them in as linear of a pattern as you can. I like to kind of put them close together in between the metallic that we already put down, but you can put yours on top as well. And if you want the throat of your hummingbird to be a little bit more red than pink, then you can use this brown instead. It's like a really red brown, and it will give your hummingbird more of a earthy kind of look to it. And as you use your pastel, if you actually use your fingers to twist it a little bit as you push into those little dots and move along, then it will rotate your pastel and help you really take use of that sharp edge to get some really precise kind of marks. And if you want to, for the throat area, you can kind of like softly blend those colors together and add another layer or a couple little highlights into the throat. I think it's nice to just have a little bit more coverage on the throat just because it's so bright and pink. So I like to blend it a little bit and then kind of go back in and re-solidify a couple of those feathers.
How do you blend it?
So you can just use your finger to blend it, and just I like to kind of go in circular motions on the paper. But if you want to, you can blend it with a damp brush as well, if you would like to try doing that. Some people use like cotton swabs. There's all different types of wedges and stuff that people like to use for blending the pastels, but I think that sometimes your finger is it's always handy at least, but it's definitely there to blend pastels if you need to. All right. And I know I'm moving kind of quickly, guys. I just have so much information I want to tell you. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to that next step. And this time I'm going to be using this light gray. It's a really light gray inside the set. And I'm basically just going to be using that to add a little bit more dimension into my feather area. And instead of doing like a really small kind of circle, I'm kind of stretching it out a little bit more and doing more of a line. And I'm just kind of piling those up in the areas that I want the chest feathers to be a little bit higher up and brighter. So I'm going to kind of focus them on that front part. And you can apply this to any of the white areas of the hummingbird's feathers that you would like to have a little bit more dimension. You can kind of build that up. And again, you can use, for this one, I would recommend using your finger to blend it. If you use a wet brush, you might pick up more of that black paper than you want, just because it's such a highlight. I would just recommend using your finger. All right. And last little pastel bit, I'm going to reach back into this kind of red-brown color. And we're going to go ahead and place some of the longer feathers that should be in this open black space that we have left on our hummingbird. If you accidentally covered over that whole area, that's totally okay. You can just add these right on top, or you can take a wet brush and scrub up that paint. It's just a wet brush with no pigment, and you can just kind of scrub it, and then it will leave that black paper showing. But we're going to be using the edge of this red-brown, and we're just going to add a couple little lines in there. They have these really long, skinny feathers underneath their wings, and they sit right about there. Right. So next, I'm sorry guys, I totally skipped the beak. Basically, we're going to be doing that same technique that we did on the wings on his beak. And we're basically just going to take our jelly roll and put a little bit of white in there. I know it's a really small space, so it doesn't need a whole lot. And just take a wet brush to soften it up. And because these brushes have such a nice point on them, we have a lot of control. And we're just going to blend that out. All right. So the last step that I want to demo with the supplies that we have today is to add some gold around the hummingbird. Now it's up to you. I mean, you can do a little bit of like a pastel background behind the hummingbird, or you could do a wash with some of the really beautiful effects that we have with our specialty colors. Or if you want to, you can do what I'm going to do. I'm just going to dip my smaller of the two brushes into my light gold. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint some little kind of magical floating dots around my hummingbird. And I think that this is kind of a really nice touch because he's so shiny already that it needs like a little bit more on the black paper just to kind of break it up. So I'm just painting a couple of these little dots around him. But if you, oh, yep.
I'm sorry. Someone's asking, how well do these colors show behind glass?
Behind glass? Yeah, they should.
Yeah,
they should show
behind glass. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they should show just fine. I don't think that there should be any problem with that. Of course, like it's so nice to see them just in person without the glass, but I don't see why the glass would really inhibit it. I think that it should be just fine.
Right, and with anything, you just want to keep it off of make sure that there's a spacer or a mat to make sure the paper is not right up against the glass.
Oh yeah, perfect. And yeah, these colors are archival and light fast and everything. So they should be good to go, even if you don't want to get it framed. So, and if you're looking at your Hummingbird and you want to build up any areas, like if you feel like you took away too much of that kind of chameleon iridescent color that was peeking through, if you're unhappy with that amount, you can always go back in and add more on top, kind of build it up. But I set aside a couple different supplies to kind of just showcase all the different things you can do on this black paper. So if you have these at home and you want to add these to your Hummingbird, you absolutely can. But if not, it's just good to know. But basically, one of the first things I wanted to show you guys was that you can add black back into your drawing to add more definition and detail. This is the Pentel brush pen. But if you have any type of ink, it can be black acrylic ink, anything like that, it'll work just fine with a brush. But you can actually go back in with your black and reestablish some of the details maybe that got lost. I like this brush pen in particular just because it has such a nice point on it. But these Aqua Elite brushes that we're using, you can dip those into ink as well. But as you can see, that black pen, just kind of putting those details back in there, it looks like it's the paper. It just kind of gives it a little bit more pop. So it gives you a little bit more control. And I also wanted to show you guys the acrylic ink that I was talking about earlier. So you can do an entire painting with this acrylic ink on the black paper. The brand is Amsterdam. It's a very, very fluid acrylic. But basically, this ink, you can put it to the side and tint it if you want to, or you can just use the ink as it is. So like if you wanted to do a large white area, you don't have to use a jelly roll for that. You could dip into this acrylic ink and really kind of just easily fill in an area with that. You can use water with it to water it down, but this acrylic ink is going to be really also great for highlights. So just another option. And last but not least, I did want to just talk a little bit more about the tinting that a couple people had asked about. It's one of my favorite things about the specialties paints is that they can be used in conjunction with standard paints to kind of tint. So let's say you have spark blue and you're painting a lizard or something that's green and you really want the spark to be green. So let me see what I'm doing here. Okay. Let's see how this shows up. So we have our blue here. It's not really showing up that well on our white paper, but it's showing up great on our black paper. And maybe we just want our green to have like a little bit of something to it. We don't want it to be overwhelming. You can take green watercolor, does not have to be Rembrandt brand, and you can tint it. So I will hold this up for you guys to see. It's going to be different because you can't see it in person, but I don't know if you can see that. But this green now has like this beautiful blue metallic quality to it. And that's just the spark blue plus a green watercolor. So if you have a full set of watercolors, you're able to mix so many different colors out of just one color. And yeah, let's see how it comes out on here. So yeah, so now we have kind of like a greenish color on here. And we can keep dipping into our green and we can make that as green as we want to. And then of course, when it dries, it'll have that even more metallic kind of quality to it. So even though, painting on the black paper is really mesmerizing and amazing and everything, painting on the white paper has a ton of different benefits as well. So, yeah, I was wondering if you guys had any questions about that or really about anything. I have all sorts of paper out to help show things off if anybody has any questions.
Just some comments in the chat. Cool, that's neat, loving this. Well, that was awesome. So, you know, really great feedback.
Awesome.
Oh,
Good.
someone
So
did
good.
ask, you are blending on paper. Does it blend on a plate?
Oh, yeah, so it will blend on a plate or aluminum, anything like that. A standard palette will work just fine. Yeah, so you can blend it on the paper if you want to, or if you want to kind of see what the color will look like first, absolutely feel free to blend it on your palette. All right. Well, awesome. If you guys do finish up your hummingbird, or if you want to show off your shells or anything, definitely, and you're going to post it online, definitely feel free to tag, you know, Plaza Art and myself at Vic Hollins Art on your paintings. I would absolutely love to see how they came out. So, oh yeah, let me show the shells again.
Art singular, Vic? I'm
Yes.
putting
Yep.
our hashtag and yours in the, okay.
Oh yeah, perfect. Vic Hollins Art. Yep.
Okay. Oh, whoops, sorry, Trisha, I just sent it directly to you. Yeah, I hate when I do that. All right. Yeah.
And yeah, I also pulled aside my koala just to show you guys how you can, you know, really use that interference color along with your standard watercolor on that black paper. So that black paper, you really can do full paintings with it and have them be, you know, really tasteful. I know there's a lot of people that are like, oh my gosh, this color is so beautiful, but I don't know what to do with it. It's like, well, you can even just paint a background with it, or just add a little couple touches in there. So yeah, that purple really just kind of makes that koala pop quite a bit. And that's the interference violet. It's one of my favorites. So
And is the rest done with gouache or acrylics? What do you?
so yeah, it's actually done with the Amsterdam acrylic ink plus tinted watercolor. I believe I used Van Gogh for this.
Okay. Beautiful. So,
and oh yeah, I just saw somebody ask if I used any black. The only areas that I used black were on the koala's eyes, but the rest of it is that black paper showing through. So yeah, I'd love to see what you guys create with your specialty watercolors. They're so much fun. So thank you guys so much for following along and having great questions. That's so awesome.
thank you, Vic. We really appreciate you being here with us today, and everyone else. Someone said, any tips on storing our samples if we don't have a little tin?
Oh, that's a great question. So, you know, they should be fine on their own, like they don't need any storage, but you can still put them in like a Ziploc bag or something like that, just to make sure that they're nice and airtight. They should be just fine on their own though. I've seen a lot of people make their own little DIY palettes out of Altoid tins. So that's a cute little tip. If you just have like one or two that you want to bring with you, you can use an Altoid tin and mix it on the lid of the palette and store your little samples inside. So
the mint tin is a really great suggestion.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, there's lots of cool travel palettes on Instagram that people have made out of little mint tins.
It's awesome. It's like its own little culture. It's really
right,
neat,
exactly.
So.
Yeah. I did want to let everybody know that we will be sending out an email in a day or two that has a link to a recording of the event on our YouTube page. And it will also include a survey so you can give us some feedback about how you thought things went today. Vic, someone's asking to see a close-up of the hummingbird.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can really see the color sparkle with when you move it around.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely got to see it from the different angles, especially because this one is the chameleon color too. So I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it looks kind of like blue from this angle, and I'm getting some purple from over here. So
you definitely see like the blue and maybe some green in there. And then, yeah, I love these color changing colors. They're so cool.
Yeah, they're awesome.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone.
Where did you say you were going to post the replay of the class?
So you'll get an email. Anybody who was registered for the event will get an email with a link directly to it.
Oh, great.
So you'll have that in a day or two. When we go to process these videos, we never really know exactly how long they're going to take. So so it'll be, sometime in the next 48 hours.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
When we take a class at Plaza Art, we usually get a discount on the day that we're taking the class. Is there going to be a discount for us?
So unfortunately, that is a little bit much harder, actually, not a little bit. It's much harder to pull off in an online virtual format than it was in the store, where we would just hand you a coupon that you got when you participated in the class. So we don't have that available today. We are hoping to build that into our program. It may depend entirely on which product we're featuring or the type of class that it is. But yeah, so I have nothing to give you today other than the great prices that are available on the supply list through the website. So that is something, especially on the Rembrandt Watercolors, they have a minimum advertised pricing, which means we can only sell it for X discount, which is 25%. And so we have all of the Rembrandt colors that were featured here today at that lower price. And the supply list link that was in your email should work. So if you wanted to shop any of the items that Vic was talking about today, you can go back to that supply list link in the email. Are there any other Rembrandt or color Rembrandt papers that will work with this? Vic, is there any other toned watercolor, or it's just black, right?
I believe that we just have black and white Rembrandt watercolor for our watercolor paper. But I know that we do make a toned paper that you can lightly use some watercolor on, but it's not going to be watercolor paper that's kind of sized for it specifically. So I'd say black and white right now, unless if Scott, you know of anything that I maybe don't.
No. No, that's correct, Vic.
Okay.
We just for watercolor paper, it is just black and white. Our toned papers are they have a very, very light sizing, so it would just be for a very light wash. But that would be pretty cool to have a gray or kind of a craft watercolor paper. I'm gonna have to pass that along.
That would be awesome. Give us a iridescent one or something. Come on, you can make it happen. I know you can.
Yeah, you'll see out there, there's a lot of variations of what they call toned mixed media paper. And the difference between that and watercolor paper is that the watercolor paper is sized differently and is a much heavier paper, so it can take the water content of watercolor. You could try it, but like they said, light washes. Okay. I think that was the last question or comment. So I'll go ahead and shut down our event for today. Again, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it, and look out for that follow-up email. Thank you so much, Vic. You did an amazing job, and we really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you guys so much. I had a blast.
Awesome.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Take care, everybody.
You too. Have a good weekend.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
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 Hi, everybody.